Taoiseach, business owners in Middleton are meeting this morning to try and plan for the future. Last week, a month's rain fell in the town in the space of just 24 hours, causing utter devastation. I welcome that the government has moved quickly to put in place an enhanced scheme for businesses with up to 100,000 in support now available. Now work needs to be done to ensure that these funds can be drawn down quickly and that the red tape is eliminated. Taoiseach, I'm concerned about the relatively low level of support that's available for homeowners, many of whom have lost everything in these floods. Residents in one estate in Beechwood Drive told the Irish Examiner that they feel abandoned. They don't know how they can rebuild and move on from this disaster when they don't have insurance cover or access to state support. Yesterday, Minister Heather Humphreys announced an additional £3 million in support for homeowners, but it's doubtful that it will be enough to meet the huge need that exists following this disaster. And many homeowners in Cork and Waterford are just utterly confused about the qualifying criteria. They've received no information about how they can apply for support or what they're entitled to. Taoiseach, the grim reality of climate change is that extreme weather events are going to increase and that we are completely unprepared for that inevitability. The people of Middleton have been waiting for nearly a decade for a flood defence scheme, and it could be another decade before it's in place, because the scheme hasn't even gone to planning yet. There are other things that the government could be doing, natural flood defences that can be installed in tandem with necessary engineering solutions. Unfortunately, because of short-sighted decision-making in recent decades, rivers have been stripped of their natural defences. Planning has been granted for building on floodplains. Ditches, culverts, hedgerows and tree cover have been removed. Peat bogs have been drained and poorly planned concrete flood defences have been installed, all of which simply pushes flooding downstream at top speed. Restoring these natural flood defences, which help the land store water and slow the course of rivers upstream, is absolutely essential if we want to minimise the risk of flood damage. Taoiseach, I have 3 questions. Can you guarantee the enhanced scheme for businesses and homeowners in flood-impacted areas will be easily accessible and adequately funded? What is the realistic timeline for the completion of the flood defence works in Middleton? And do you think it's time to come up with a national land use plan? Will the government, if in doing that, maybe incentivise landowners? How would you come up with a plan to do that? And do you recognise the need to do that and not just operate in terms of piecemeal, massive concrete flood infrastructure without an overall plan for the flow of water?
Thanks, Deputy, and thanks for raising this really important issue, which I know is of enormous importance to people in Cork and Waterford, and indeed in other parts of the country that have been affected by flooding, not just in the last few weeks, but in the last few years. And I had a chance to visit Middleton last week, a town that I know very well, and I've seen a lot of flood damage in my time, but this was at a different scale. Flood waters that were up to my arm, and not just water, dirt, mud, sewage, a huge amount of damage done. And I've seen in other floods where people in a shop, for example, or in a house could save their belongings, could save their stock by bringing it upstairs or putting it up high. That just wasn't possible for a huge number of people. Just the scale and speed of the flood, in some cases breaking the glass windows of shop fronts, which is something I have to say I hadn't seen before. And that's why the government responded with the decision that it made on Tuesday, a business scheme where you pretty much get €5,000 up front to help with the immediate costs of clean-up and repair, and then a scheme of up to 20,000 or 100,000 in some cases, particularly where people have lost their stock. This, of course, is for businesses that tried to get flood insurance but couldn't get it despite their best efforts because of where they're located. For homeowners, that's not just for homeowners, by the way, it applies to rental properties as well. We made that change too on Tuesday. People will get the help that they need. It is means tested, but the means test has been relaxed. And again, it's important to bear in mind that if you're over the means test amount, roughly 50,000 for a single person, 90,000 for a couple, it's not that you get nothing. It's that you get 100% if you're under that amount, and you have to make a contribution then if you're above the means test. So even people who have very good incomes will still get some help with the repairs to their property and replacement of white goods and so on. We will make it as simple as possible. Social protection staff, community welfare officers have already gone door to door. They've already paid the first initial grants to a lot of residents, and Red Cross will be doing the same. That'll all be very much up and running this week. And on the social protection side, it was up and running right away. We'll try and make it as simple as possible, but there do have to be checks and balances. Ultimately, this is taxpayers' money, and sadly, as we learned even during the pandemic, when it came to EWIS and when it came to PUP, there were irregularities. So we have to bear in mind this is taxpayers' money and have to make sure that there are some checks and balances, but we will try to minimise that as much as possible. In terms of the flood relief schemes, Minister O'Donovan had a very good meeting with Cork County Council yesterday, due to receive the report on that today. It's still intended to get the flood relief scheme into planning next year, but these are complex schemes that take a lot of time and are often challenged and opposed at Bord Penála and in court. We've 50 done and they've worked, 90 in the pipeline, so getting these done. And on the issue of a land use plan, yes, we need a land use plan for Ireland. We are working on that at the moment, very much being led by Minister Hackett, but obviously agriculture involved in that too, and other government departments.
Thanks for your reply, Taoiseach, and I think you understand the impact on the community in Middleton based on your reply, and I suppose with that then you can understand how stressful and anxiety-inducing it is to know that that might happen again and again and again. It's taken, they're waiting a decade for their flood relief works, and it will be another decade before it's introduced. And there's a whole load of impacts that go with that. I know from my own constituency, if you can't get insurance, not only do you have the fear of not being able to afford to kind of rebuild your home or your life, but also you might not be able to get finance to build an extension. It has a massive far-reaching impact. But I think I'm glad you said you're looking at doing a national land use plan, because ultimately what we have here in relation to climate change is it's as if the tap is on, and the approach so far has been, if the sink's overflowing, to keep mopping up the water that's going on the floor, maybe replace the floor, build a wall around the sink, but not actually go and turn the tap off, which is what we really need. And, the fact that we've had, so many developments on floodplains, consistent deforestation, our agriculture policy is driving the opposite of what you're talking about there in relation to addressing this. And there's been no attempt in that department to move towards this. So can you please acknowledge that all of those things have to change to really reassure communities like Middleton, like other places in Cork and Waterford, that you acknowledge the whole overall approach of government has to change to address climate change? It's here.
Thanks, Deputy. And, I was very struck by some of the people I met telling me that they were affected by the floods in 2015, and nobody could give them the guarantee that it wouldn't happen to them again in a few months' time or a few years' time, long before the flood relief scheme is in place. But we will push that as quickly as we can. We do 50 done. They work. Worked in Bandon, worked in Douglas, worked in Toker, worked in the Talca in Dublin, so we know they work, and we've about 90 more in train. But I agree with your basic point. We have to look at this in the round. It isn't just about flood barriers. We have to consider land use and the impact that inappropriate land use can have on flooding and drainage, and also coastal protections. And a memo went to government only yesterday from Minister Donovan around how we're going to manage the change that's happening to our coastline. Some of it's been happening for millennia, some of it is linked to climate change as well. And I agree that we're all going to have a much greater focus on adaptation as part of climate action. Climate change is a reality. Even if the world reaches net zero by 2050, and it might not, there's a lot more climate change to come. It's baked in, it's going to get worse, there's going to be more of it. And while us reducing our emissions will make a small contribution to slowing down climate change, the most effective thing we can do to protect our people and our property and our infrastructure is adaptation. And we're going to need a much greater focus, I think, on that in the time ahead.